The grand chamber of the Capitol was hushed except for the faint shuffling of papers and the clicking of camera shutters. Reporters lined the back rows like hawks waiting for movement, while aides whispered hurriedly along the walls. This wasn't just another oversight hearing, this was the one that everyone knew could spark national headlines. At the center of it all sat Representative Jasmine Crockett, her expression sharp and composed, and across from her, Supreme Court Justice Samuel Alito, looking as confident as ever, his eyes betraying not even a hint of concern. For weeks, tension had been brewing over allegations that certain Supreme Court justices had grown too close to political donors and power players. The country was watching, demanding answers. And Jasmine Crockett, a Texas Democrat known for her unflinching style and quick wit, had become the unofficial voice of that demand. She wasn't one to tiptoe around authority, and today, she wasn't going to start. "Justice Alito," she began, her voice calm yet cutting through the air like glass, "you've spoken at length about the independence of the judiciary. But many Americans are asking, how independent can a justice truly be when they're regularly seen attending events hosted by individuals with clear political or financial interests in Supreme Court decisions?" Alito didn't flinch. He leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled, and then, there it was, that smirk. Subtle, but unmistakable, a slow curl at the corner of his mouth that radiated quiet superiority. The cameras caught it instantly, zooming in, broadcasting it live to millions. "With all due respect, Representative," Alito said finally, his tone calm but laced with condescension, "I find the insinuation that attendance equals corruption to be disappointing. It's the kind of simplistic narrative that diminishes the very institution you claim to protect." A few members of the audience chuckled nervously, unsure if it was safe to react. Crockett didn't blink. "Justice Alito," she said, her voice steady, "the institution I claim to protect doesn't belong to you, it belongs to the people. And the people deserve transparency, not theatrics." That struck a chord. Alito's smile faltered slightly, though it returned almost instantly. He tilted his head as though amused, that familiar air of detachment returning. "Transparency, Representative, doesn't mean allowing politicians to weaponize public perception against the court. Surely you understand that." Crockett's eyes narrowed just a touch. "What I understand," she said, leaning forward, "is that when a justice's impartiality is questioned, dismissing those concerns with a smirk isn't an answer, it's a problem." The chamber went silent. Even the air seemed to pause. Cameras shifted, focusing on Alito's face as the faint smirk flickered again, now thinner, almost mocking. He adjusted his glasses slowly, as though the entire exchange amused him. "You seem very passionate about this, Representative," he said coolly. "But passion doesn't substitute for understanding. The Supreme Court doesn't answer to popularity polls or internet outrage." Crockett's response came without hesitation. "No, Justice Alito, it answers to the Constitution. And the Constitution gives Congress the power to oversee how every branch exercises its authority. Even yours." Murmurs rippled through the room. One of Alito's aides shifted uneasily behind him. But Alito didn't back down. He gave a slow nod, lips pressed together, his smirk returning like armor. "Then by all means," he said, "oversee. But don't mistake scrutiny for superiority." Crockett smiled then, not a polite smile, but one that carried steel. "Trust me, Justice," she said softly, "there's no superiority here. Just accountability, something some people in power seem to find uncomfortable." The audience audibly reacted. A few gasps, a few muffled claps before the moderator called for order. But Crockett wasn't done. She flipped through her notes deliberately, then looked up again. "I have one final question," she said. "Do you believe that ethical standards should apply to Supreme Court justices the same way they do to every other branch of government?" Alito hesitated, just a second too long. His jaw tightened before he replied, "The Supreme Court has its own system of ethics and integrity that has worked for over 2 centuries. It doesn't need political interference masquerading as reform. So the answer is no?" Crockett asked, raising an eyebrow. Alito's smirk widened. "The answer," he said, voice tinged with disdain, "is that I will not let this institution be dragged into political theater." Crockett leaned back in her chair, crossing her arms. "With respect, Justice Alito," she said quietly, but with enough fire to shake the air, "the theater began the moment you decided the rules don't apply to you." The audience gasped again, louder this time. Reporters began typing furiously. Alito adjusted his papers, pretending not to hear, but that smirk, that one small expression of power, lingered. The two stared at each other for a long, charged moment, neither willing to blink. By the time the moderator called for a recess, the tension was unbearable. Cameras had captured every second. The smirk, the stare, the silence. Jasmine Crockett had not raised her voice once, but she had shaken one of the most powerful men in the country without needing to. She gathered her papers calmly, her expression unreadable, but the gleam in her eyes said everything. She knew exactly what she'd done. And by the end of the day, millions of Americans would, too. By the next morning, the confrontation between Justice Samuel Alito and Representative Jasmine Crockett had become the biggest story in the nation. Every major network replayed the clip on a loop, that slight, knowing smirk, followed by Alito's words, "You're out of your depth." It had been less than 10 seconds of television, but it was enough to ignite an entire country's debate about power, arrogance, and respect. The internet was on fire. Hashtags trended within hours, hashtag Alito smirk, hashtag Crockett vs Alito, and hashtag accountability matters. Memes popped up showing Crockett calmly staring down the justice, side by side with captions like, "Grace under pressure," and, "When power meets truth." Even political commentators who rarely agreed found themselves dissecting the same question: had Alito's smirk been a harmless reflex, or a symbol of deep-seated contempt for oversight? On Capitol Hill, the atmosphere was electric. Lawmakers who'd been in the room that day described the exchange as palpable and historic. Aides recalled the silence that followed Crockett's last remark, the kind of silence that usually only comes before applause or collapse. One staffer told The Hill, "You could feel everyone holding their breath." Nobody expected her to keep her composure like that after he tried to belittle her. But she didn't flinch, not once. Crockett's office received thousands of messages overnight, letters, emails, tweets, from ordinary Americans thanking her for speaking truth to power. One message read, "For the first time, I felt like someone was standing up for us, not just playing politics." Another said, "He smirked at every one of us, and you wiped it off his face without raising your voice." Justice Alito, meanwhile, found himself under more scrutiny than ever before. Editorials accused him of arrogance. Late-night hosts joked that he had smirked his way into a scandal. The Washington Post published an op-ed titled, "The Smirk Heard Round the World," calling it a visual representation of the distance between power and accountability. Still, Alito didn't issue an apology. His office released a short statement claiming he remained committed to maintaining the integrity of the court and its independence from political theatrics. But for many, it was too little, too late. The public mood had shifted, and Crockett had become an unexpected face of resistance. 3 days later, she appeared on Morning America. Dressed in navy blue, calm but resolute, she spoke with the same measured precision she had in the hearing. "This isn't about personalities," she said. "It's about principles. When someone entrusted with interpreting our laws dismisses legitimate oversight with a smirk, it sends a message that they're untouchable. And nobody in this democracy should be untouchable." Her words resonated across the country. Cable news panels debated whether her exchange might spark long overdue judicial reforms. Protesters gathered outside the Supreme Court with signs reading, "Ethics for all," and "No one above the law." The viral clip wasn't just entertainment anymore, it had become a rallying cry. Behind the scenes, sources close to Alito reportedly urged him to make peace. "The optics are bad," one aide warned. "The more silent you stay, the bigger she gets." But Alito remained firm. To him, the uproar was nothing more than noise. Yet, what he failed to grasp was that this noise had become a national movement. Jasmine Crockett, meanwhile, didn't bask in the fame. She returned to work as if nothing had changed, attending briefings, filing legislation, and quietly pushing for a bill to strengthen judicial ethics rules. When asked by reporters if she thought the justice owed her an apology, she smiled slightly and said, "He doesn't owe me an apology. He owes the public an explanation." A week after the incident, the two names, Alito and Crockett, were still dominating headlines. Editorials painted the moment as symbolic of a generational shift. A younger, more diverse, outspoken Congress refusing to bow before the old guard of untouchable power. Social media users hailed it as a modern David and Goliath moment, except this David had a microphone, not a sling. At a rally in Dallas, Crockett addressed the moment directly for the first time. Standing before a crowd of thousands, she said, "When he smirked, I saw more than just arrogance, I saw every person who's ever been told they're out of their depth when they dared to speak up. I saw every woman, every person of color, every working American who's been told to stay in their place. That smirk wasn't just for me. It was for all of us. And I refused to let it stand. The cheers that followed were deafening. By that night, her speech had gone viral again. Even her critics admitted she'd turned a condescending moment into a national reckoning. For Justice Alito, the smirk that once projected control had become an emblem of disconnect. For Jasmine Crockett, the calm stare that met it became the definition of courage. Weeks later, as Congress revisited proposals for judicial ethics reform, Crockett's name appeared in the preamble of the bill, a subtle acknowledgement of the spark she had lit. And though Samuel Alito never publicly mentioned her again, every time he appeared before a camera, his expression was noticeably restrained. The smirk was gone. The moment had changed more than just two reputations. It had crystallized something larger, the idea that no position, no title, no robe, puts anyone above being questioned. Jasmine Crockett hadn't just challenged a justice. She had reminded a nation that power, when unchecked, must always be confronted, not with anger, but with truth, patience, and the courage to never look away. Title: Samuel Alito smirked. Jasmine Crockett's fiery showdown stuns Congress. Description: a viral confrontation between Justice Samuel Alito and Representative Jasmine Crockett shook Washington, sparking national debate over power, ethics, and respect after Alito's dismissive smirk became a symbol of judicial arrogance, and Crockett's poise became its perfect counter. Hashtags: Hashtag Samuel Alito, hashtag Jasmine Crockett, hashtag Alito smirk, hashtag Crockett clapback, hashtag judicial ethics, hashtag power and accountability, hashtag viral hearing, hashtag political showdown. Keywords: Samuel Alito, Jasmine Crockett, congressional hearing, viral moment, judicial ethics, Supreme Court controversy, power and accountability, political debate, trending news.